Hey, this is Dave from the Adobe Character Animator team, and today I am extremely excited to announce the latest release of Adobe Character Animator CC is out. You can download it right now. And there's so much packed in this release that we've divided it into 2 separate tutorial videos. And this first one is a deep dive into the new triggers system. So how to convert your existing puppets into the new system, what's the difference between triggers and swap sets and all of that stuff, and the new visual controls panel and how to customize that to give your characters custom visual control. There is a lot here, so let's get started. The single biggest change in this release is the completely reworked trigger system. So triggers are the way that you show or hide particular artwork or behaviors or groups by pressing an alphanumeric key in the past. So for example, if I press the G key, I want these glasses to appear or disappear. And this was done in the past by when you import a character, they automatically got this thing called keyboard triggers, a behavior that basically runs the show for pressing triggers. But you'll notice now in this latest release, this says obsolete. And that's because there is a new behavior just called triggers that is going to run everything from here on out and moving forward. So what you're going to want to do with any existing puppets that you have is bring them into the new version and then go to Puppet Convert Obsolete Trigger Keys. Once you select that, it's going to go through this conversion process and a few things are going to happen. Number one, that keyboard trigger obsolete behavior is going to disappear, and now you'll see this new triggers behavior over here showing up. And so that's kind of the brains behind the trigger system from here on out. So you won't be seeing keyboard triggers anymore. And in fact, if you go to something like glasses and go down here, you'll notice the properties of keyboard triggers say obsolete as well. So once you've converted, if you add things down here like 6 or hide others in group or some of the stuff you used to have to do, it's not going to work anymore because it doesn't have the underlying keyboard triggers old behavior running it. But that's okay because hopefully this new system is going to make things a little bit easier. So we're going to walk through how to consolidate and make sense of all this in a little bit, but let's start with a simpler version of this character where I haven't added any triggers whatsoever. Let's say I just imported this PSD into this version and I want to start from scratch. And I want to start with the glasses. So there's this one layer, glasses, that when I turn it on, I want glasses to show. So there's 4 different ways I could actually add this as a trigger. So first, you've got your triggers panel down here in the lower left corner, and this shows up in rig mode. This is tabbed with the history panel, so you can see all your changes you've ever made. And it says here, drop layers here to create triggers. So that is the first way to create a trigger. You take your layer, you drag it into your triggers panel, and it shows up here. And it says glasses. And you'll notice the little keyboard icon that used to be over here in the right-hand corner is now down here. And so I can just click it, type G, and then that means when I press the G key, glasses are going to show up. All right, so that's the first way to do it. Let's click this and delete it. What's another way? Well, here, where that keyboard column used to be, you'll notice there is a little trigger icon, the little finger pressing a button. And if I go down over top of this, you'll see a little plus icon appear. So if I click this, it says create trigger or create swap set, which we'll get to in a second. That's disabled for now because this isn't a group, but I'm just going to go to click create trigger. And the exact same thing happens. It shows up down here as a trigger. I can type in G, and that is going to do the same thing. When I press the G key, glasses are going to appear. All right, another way to do it is you've got this little plus symbol here in the triggers panel. It says add an empty trigger swap set. I can click on that, create trigger. That's just going to create this blank trigger group. I could click this and press enter and call it whatever I want. Let's call this glasses 2. And then I can just drag this layer over top of an existing trigger, and it's going to be added. And you can tell that a layer is added down here at the bottom where it says layers. And I can see Cassandra, head, glasses. I can see the path of what is here. And so notice glasses 2 and glasses both have the same layer associated with them. And that's a really powerful concept is the new trigger system. You could drag as many layers as many times into as many triggers as you want. So instead of being limited to just this key for just this trigger, like the old system, now you have a lot more flexibility. So if I wanted this glasses to be done with H or something like that, I have the ability to do that. Now, this can be expanded to other things. So for example, in the body group, I have this red monster shirt that she can also wear, that she can change into. And so if I wanted this to also be triggered by the glasses, I could just drag this over top of glasses and it's going to show up down here. So you'll see both the head glasses and the body shirt too will both be triggered by the G key. So let's test that out by going to record mode. And so I've got Cassandra here. And if I press G, now both are showing up, the red monster shirt and the glasses. And if I let go, they go back. Now the thing I set to H, that's just going to show the glasses. So you can start to get a sense of, okay, I can add as many layers or groups or whatever as I want to individual keys or triggers. The very last way to add triggers is by right-clicking any layer or group. So if I go to glasses and go down here to create trigger, it's going to create yet another trigger for the glasses. Now notice there's also this add to trigger, and that would allow me to add it as a layer to an existing trigger that's already there instead of creating a new one. So the latch parameter that used to be over in the right-hand properties is now down here, and it says latch. And if I click on that, notice the background of the key turns a little bit darker. Let's see here in record mode. So when I press G, it's going to stick in that position. It's going to be latched into that on show position. And then when I press it again, it's going to hide again instead of me having to hold and press it down. If a layer in your puppet has been added to a trigger, you'll see this little hand icon show up in the right side. And if you hover over it, it will show you what those triggers are, if any. And if you click on it, it's going to highlight in the triggers panel the trigger that it's associated with. Now for this one, this was added into 3 different triggers, and you'll notice that gets a little arrow icon that shows up next to it. And so if I hover over it, it'll show me the different triggers it's associated with. And then if I click on it, it will also allow me to select the right one, and then that will be highlighted over in the triggers panel. So it's a little easier to understand, where, okay, this was used for 3 different triggers. This was used for just 1 trigger. Hopefully it makes the understanding the relationship between these 2 columns a little bit easier. But now we come to an instance like the hands. And in this case, this character has multiple hand positions. They've got a hand like this, a palm flip, a point, a thumbs up. They have, a bunch of different hand positions. And in this case, I only want one of these triggers to show up at a time. And so we've added this thing called swap sets. And swap sets are special triggers where only one will show up at any given time. And the same rules apply to these triggers as the other triggers. So if I wanted my hand group to be a swap set, if I just click over here, I have this new option called Create Swap Set, and that will do it, as well as just dragging the whole group in here. So a swap set looks a little different. It's got this little icon here, and I can twirl it up or down. And then I've got all my different possible swapped artwork pieces inside of it. And whichever icon is filled in, so that could be thumbs up, that could be point, that could be whatever, that is going to be the default trigger. That's going to be the first thing that shows up in this group, okay? And now you don't need a default. You could take it off if you wanted to, but I think in most cases, people are going to want some sort of default position. So my recommendation would be don't add a key for your default trigger, but for all your others that you want to swap to, you would want to add keys to that. So I'm just going to click in here and do 1, 2, and so on. And so this tells Character Animator, all right, start with hand 1, and then when I press the 1 key, show this hand instead and hide this one. This was previously done by that hide others in group checkbox that was a little obtuse and hard to explain. And so this makes it a little bit clearer. You have this group and you can see all the different things that could be swapped in and out. So let's test this out in record mode. All right, so she's got her hand here, and the one that's showing up by default is the one that I marked as default by clicking on that little hand icon. And then if I press 1, it's going to swap in that next one. And if I let go, it's going to go back to the default. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All her different hand positions are showing up, and only one is showing up at a time. This makes a lot of sense for things where you want to show only one at a time, like hands, like different eyelid positions, like different eyebrow states. Groups where you have multiple states that you want to swap in and out of something, the best solution moving forward is going to be creating a swap set for them. And the trigger system is pretty flexible. So here I've got my glasses, and let's say I wanted to get rid of this shirt layer. So I click the little X next to it, and now this glasses trigger is only going to do the glasses. But let's say later I decide that was a mistake, and I've got this other trigger down here, shirt 2, that I want to show up as well. If I drag this trigger on top of another trigger, an existing trigger, it will basically merge the two and incorporate the layers from the thing I was dragging into the trigger that I already created. And I found that merging very helpful for making my converted old puppets feel a lot cleaner in the triggers panel, a lot easier to understand. So in the past, I had these eyebrow groups for Cassandra. She had a default, her neutral eyes, and then eyebrows, and then worried and angry states. 1 and 2 triggered those. And then I did the exact same thing for the right eyebrow, worried and angry 1 and 2. Well, I don't actually need 2 separate swap sets anymore. I could just make this an eyebrow group. So I'm just going to call this eyebrows, and let's just call this default. And I'm just going to drag the default from the right eyebrow and the worried from the right eyebrow and the angry from the right eyebrow into the left eyebrow group. And now default is going to be both the right and left eyebrow neutral states. Same with worried. It's going to be both right and left eyebrow. So you can see this makes it a lot cleaner. You're not hunting through your layer panel to see, oh yeah, where did I add that trigger? Or was this set to hide others in group or anything like that? It's a lot easier and more manageable to have all your triggers in one place down here. Now, the way the new trigger system works may require a little bit of surgery on existing characters to get working right. And that means going into the actual PSD or AI file to change the structure of some of these where your artwork lives. So for example, this old character dude used to have this yell mouth that showed up here. And when I press the 2 key, it shows up. And it's in the same group as all the other mouse shapes that automatically show up when you lip sync. Okay, so let's go to record mode here, and let's see what happens when I press the 2 key. Okay, nothing. Okay, now it's showing up, but then if I smile, it goes away. So what's happening here is the lip sync behavior, the mouth, is overriding the trigger of the yell. And that's because I have it in the same group as these other things that are getting triggered by the lip sync. So basically what's happening here is I'm running into trouble because I've got the yell inside a group that has other things that could be triggered by my voice, by audio. And this also applies to other things like blinks, head turns, cycle layers, other behaviors that could be triggered by certain things happening or events taking place. And so if you put your triggered thing in the same group as those things and those get triggered by something else, those are going to overwrite or supersede what you've got over here. So let's take a look at a fixed version of this guy. And in this case, I made a separate folder outside of the mouth group where I added my alternate mouth shapes. So the yell and a knockout mouth are both showing up out here. And because of that, because they're not in the same group as this thing that's going to get triggered by the audio, they're safe and they're going to override whatever else I have showing up here. But I have to set it up as a swap set. Basically saying, okay, by default, I normally want the mouth to show up, but then when I press yell, I only want that to show up and I want to hide the mouth. And the way I set that up down here, you'll see I've got a mouth swap set group, and the default is going to be the whole mouth group. So basically, I just took the mouth group and dragged it over top of default, and it gets added as the default, meaning by default, if I talk, it's going to do the normal lip sync. But then when I do knockout or yell, it's going to only show those layers and instead hide the rest of the mouth. So you kind of see how you set these sort of things up. Swap sets can be really powerful and hide whole groups or whole instances of things inside a character. And it's going to take a little experimentation to find out what works best for your particular character. But all of the example characters that we have up on the Adobe site and on the OK Samurai Puppets page all have been converted to the latest trigger system. And so if there's something you're struggling with, there's probably an example character out there that will be able to help you understand how these are coming together and how to solve whatever potential issues you're having. Now, one of the biggest benefits of the new trigger system is how triggers show up in the timeline for recorded performances. So So remember in the past, you may have recorded a trigger for the K key or something like that, and the timeline just shows K and a long block down there, and you're like, wait, what was that for? What was K triggering again? You had to remember and kind of do some mental gymnastics to remember how you had set everything up. So it's a lot easier in the new version. I'll show you what I mean. So let's press record, and this character has, her different eye positions, and the glasses that appear and disappear. And then if I bring her hand up here, I've got a few different hand positions like the thumbs or like that or a point or other things like that, and go back to default. Okay, so now if I zoom in here a little bit, notice I've got a triggers section that says glasses, eyes, and right hand. And notice I've got takes for glasses, impressed eyes, happy eyes, and then all my different hand positions. And the names that I set in the triggers panel are all showing up down here, making it a lot clearer when things begin and end. So for the triggers, for example, if I'm editing this, I'm probably going to turn triggers off. I'm probably going to disarm the triggers behavior so I can actually see everything happening. So for the glasses, for example, that was a very simple trigger, and I can see when glasses shows up, that's when it begins and ends. So you edit these exactly like you do the lip sync up above when you're doing the different mouse shapes. You can just select and drag over the in or the out point and change where that particular trigger begins or ends. Or you could just drag, select both of the in and the out point, and drag to change the positioning of that without changing the duration. Now for swap sets like the right hand, notice when the default is showing up, there's nothing there. Default is not going to show up as a bar, but when you move into one of these other hand positions, it will show them, and then you'll go back to the default. So whatever you have set as default is going to show up as blank space in the timeline. And all those other swap positions then will show up as individual bars down here. So this makes timeline editing of triggers a lot easier. It's much more clear, much easier to get that precision timing just right. And to me, it's one of the best benefits of the new trigger system. Now there's another new panel that's complementary to the triggers panel, and that's the new controls panel. And you can find that in record or stream mode. So in record mode, it's tabbed with the timeline over here. And if you click controls, you'll see this thing that says perform or layout, and it says generate controls for your puppet's name. Same thing in stream mode. If I go over here, I can see perform, layout, generate controls. So let's see what happens when I press generate controls. It says 22 triggers added to layout. And now I have this visual system of all the different triggers that I have set up in rig mode associated with this puppet. So instead of remembering the 4 does this to the eyes or 6 does glasses or whatever, I can just click on them right here. And it's a nice visual way to control your character. Now the nice thing is this system is fully customizable. So if I click onto layout over here, everything gets a dotted line, and I can move these things around and rearrange them however I want. I can even delete triggers that I don't need. For example, a lot of times in your swap sets, your defaults will show up, but if you don't have a key assigned to them, maybe you don't want those to show up. They'll just show up when you stop showing another swapped artwork piece. So I can just delete any of those if I wanted to. It's your choice though. And then I can organize these however I want, and there's some nice little snapping that's involved. A lot of really nice things you can do. So that's looking pretty good. Now I can also right click any of these to get a few different options. So if I want kind of a lighter background for them, if they're not showing up very well, like these eyebrows don't show up very well on the dark background, so I might choose light instead to make them show up a little bit easier. I can also change the keys here as well. So if I didn't want 2 to show up here, I could do a few things. I could either right click and go to remove trigger key, and that's going to remove that key binding to it. Or if I have it selected and I press a letter like F, then that is going to be the new trigger key for it. So by default, the artwork is auto-generated by what the trigger system is seeing. And I could hide some of these, layers to make this look a little cleaner if I wanted to. I also have the ability, if there's multiple layers or groups associated with the trigger, to right-click it and change. This is really subtle for these eyes, but you'll notice I can change which artwork it's pulling from to show that little thumbnail image, which is a nice little customization touch. But perhaps the coolest part about the controls panel is it allows you to customize things even further with some behavior parameters. So if you go into layout mode, notice as soon as you go into layout mode that some things in your behaviors over here get some dotted lines around them as well. And if they have that, that means they can be dragged into your controls panel to serve as additional controls for your character. So in the transform behavior, for example, for Cassandra here, I could drag in position X and rotation and opacity. So now if I go back to perform mode and make sure that my character is selected over here, then look what happens when I drag position X. She moves back and forth on and off the screen. Opacity slider. She disappears and reappears. Rotation. She rotates. So you create basically this custom control board for your character doing all sorts of different things that you may want them to do. And this makes character mobility and flexibility a lot easier. And the nice thing is I can change the parameters down here, the min and max value of each of these. So position X, by default, this was 900 and negative 900. If I only wanted her to move a little bit, I could click on this and change this to, 250 and negative 250 instead. And now notice when I go to perform and move the slider, she's only moving a little bit back and forth, not on and off the screen. Now better yet, when you save your puppet, when you export your puppet by going to File, Export Puppet, that's going to create a .puppet file to share with other people, not only is the original master artwork, your PSD or AI file, plus the rigging you've added in Character Animator going to be included in that file, but also this custom controls panel is going to show up as well. So you can create a ready-to-go puppet, share it with someone else, and they will have all these controls and features and be ready to go for a live stream or a recorded performance. Now the little refresh icon down here in the corner, click on that and that's going to look for any more triggers that you've added to your character. So if you're working on it and adding some more stuff, it's going to find those and add them here. But now if I'm resizing my panel and things are getting a little messy, I can also press Alt and click on PC or Option click on Mac, and that's going to reflow everything snapped into kind of a nice left aligned, organized way. And that's helpful, particularly when you're moving between modes. If you went to record mode, for example, and you might want to rearrange things, just press Option click, and that's going to make things fit within whatever size of that controls panel that you have. Another great addition is the ability to control these triggers with an external MIDI device. So I've got my laptop here hooked up to a MIDI-enabled keyboard. And if I go into layout mode here, so let's go to layout and select the glasses trigger, then with that selected, if I went and clicked like this G key here, and so that turns this green and tells you that the G key is what is controlling this. And if I press another key, it's going to switch that or this. And as I go up in the octaves, it's going to change the numbers as well. So that's great. Very easy to hook up to a specific key. So if you had a keyboard or another type of MIDI device with little pictures on it or something like that, you could hook it up to one of these, your puppet. Now MIDI also works with sliders, and this is where it really gets interesting. So if I select a slider here, opacity, and with it selected in layout mode, I'm just going to move this little modulation wheel slightly. And doing that is going to add in this opacity control now. So now when I move this slider, this little wheel up and down, she's going to turn invisible, and notice that the opacity slider is moving up and down as well. Now if you want to get really crazy, you can connect several of these controls to a single MIDI control. So I'll show you what I mean. I've got my position X, scale, rotation, and opacity. I'm going to select them all, and then with all of them selected, I'm just going to move this mod wheel again. And now look what happens. All of them are connected, and when I move the wheel now, she's doing all four of those things at once. So we're going to see a lot of really cool systems in the future, I think, with people hooking up whole facial expressions to sliders and that sort of stuff. There'll certainly be some more tips and tricks about this in the future, but this is a quick overview of some of the possibilities of MIDI control. Now, one word of warning when using these in record mode. To have these show up when recording, you have to make sure that that behavior is armed, or that parameter is armed within the properties panel. So if I want these triggers to show up as I was showing earlier in the timeline, I need to make sure the trigger's behavior is armed. It has a red dot next to it. Now by default, that's how it looks, so that's probably going to be fine. But for some of these custom controls, Position X, for example, is not armed by default. It shows up down here and it has a little circle next to it, but by default, it doesn't have a red dot next to it. So if I recorded a performance, for example, let's press record, and I just do position X back and forth like this a little bit, and then press record again to stop it. Let's look at the timeline, and position X is not showing up. And that's because it wasn't armed for recording. So if I want to record those, I need to make sure they're armed. So I want position X, rotation, opacity. I will arm position X, rotation, and opacity. And now let's try recording one more time. And I will move her around. I will rotate her a little bit, and I will make her turn invisible and back on. And this time, those show up in the timeline because they were armed for recording. So for live stuff, you don't have to worry about this. It's just going to show up live, and that's working fine. But if you want to record those values and show up in the timeline, you're going to want to make sure you arm each of those individually. All right, so that is an overview of the new trigger system. It is going to take some time to learn. If you're used to the old system and doing the obscure hunting for hide others in group and latching and all that stuff, it's going to take a little time to get used to the new system. But we're happy to help. Please, if you're running into any rigging issues, please post in the official forums, and we will try our best to help you understand how to get your puppets up and running as quickly as possible. And for all new puppets, hopefully this is going to make life a lot easier and give you a lot more power and flexibility of how you perform and what your character can do in the future. So we're really excited to see what people create using this. All right, that's it for this first video. Hopefully that helps get you up and running with the new trigger system and controls panel. Next up is everything else. We have a whole second part that goes into detail with the new physics behavior, clipping masks, new rigging improvements, and a lot more. So definitely check that out and have fun.